Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. And, you know, I say that all the time. You know, we're putting death out of business, you know, putting the Grim Reaper in the unemployment queue. You know, we're putting the grave digger out of a job, you know, but it's kind of an important thing. But what does it refer to? It refers to this notion of living for an exceptionally long time, as Chairman Gennady Stolarov would call it, quote-unquote open-ended duration, because transhumanism wouldn't want to force everlasting life on anyone. What they want to do is open up the option of living for as long as you would like, essentially. And there's different techniques to get us there, and different ways to you know, enable a longer, happier life with super happiness in there. We talked about depression, Arin. Thank you very much for coming on and talking about that. Super wellness as well, but also super longevity and longevity. And, you know, centurianism is on the rise. You know, the average lifespan nowadays for men and women is a little bit different. You're looking at anywhere between globally about 74 to 84 years of age. In Western developed countries, you're looking at, for men and women around mid-80s, somewhere around there. So compare that to historic cases of aging, and you're looking at a massive increase of aging already. They're outliving kings and queens of old. That's just the middle class. And, you know, you're looking at a trajectory of, you know, more and more centurions coming down the line as science and technology develops. But that's not super longevity. But there's this interesting idea that some people out there are opposed to super longevity. You know one of these people. They call them the bio-Luddites. In the biological sense, because transhumanism, a couple of these techniques, whether it be mind uploading or nanotechnology, or you know, some other techniques for super longevity, you know, you know, biomarkers and stuff. They we propose living for a long time in many different ways, but there are some people out there who oppose it for people. Welcome back, Arin. How are you? And who are some of these people, these bio-Luddites in the biological sense, or these people who are opposed to longevity and super longevity? You've done some research and you've discovered these people. Welcome back to Detonation. It's really good to have you here on this anti-aging, longevity, super longevity episode.
Well, good morning, Steele, and once again, thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor and pleasure to be on your show, and I always appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm doing fantastic today. It's a lovely day, and so today what I'd like to discuss is I would like to make a case for why we should work on anti-aging, whether it's reversing the aging process or ending it altogether. And whether or not that's possible is another topic for another time. But today, I'd like to talk about what I call a moral imperative to work on this. And you are correct. We hear all sorts of opinions on the topic, ranging from, yes, this is something we definitely should work on, to, on the other spectrum, well, no, we shouldn't do it for whatever reason. And before I start, I would like to say that I respect everyone's opinions on this, even if I might not agree with it. Additionally, I would also like to add that those of us who are proponents of doing more aging research, or research into reversing aging, our standpoint is not that everyone needs to agree with this, or everyone needs to do it, or everyone has to be for it. What we'd like to have is a scenario in which those people who are interested in living longer lives are able to take advantage of advancements in science and technology in order to do so. And then if anyone doesn't for any reason, of course, that's their own choice, and we would never want to make that choice for them. So I just like to clarify that before we start.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I always say, you know, this is why we have so many libertarians in transhumanism, whether or not people, focus on that is because we do like to focus on all of these technologies and all of these systems as being sort of optional for the individual. You wouldn't want to force immortality on anyone against their will.
No.
That's awful and horrific in its own way. You wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to force. There are certain circumstances where the health of the group is prioritized over the individual. If there's a disease that's running rampant, and the only way to kill the disease is to immunize everybody against the disease. For example, now that's a scenario. It's a moral argument. It's a philosophical argument, but the health of the group usually at that point will trump the health of the individual. And it's a hard debate to have because you're eliminating somebody's freedom for the health of a group. And but if it's a case against a superbug developing, or and overpowering and threatening the health of the whole group, or somebody's freedom, I think most people, including the group itself, would say that okay, the individual's rights would have to be restricted a little bit at that point, because the health of the group is probably, the health of the group outweighs the rights of the few in that case. But that's a very rare instance. And when you're talking about open-ended duration living, it's kind of funny, because a lot of people argue all the way down the line. They say, "Oh, I wouldn't want to live to 20 because that sounds pretty old. I might knock myself off by then." Well, 40, that sounds like ancient age. I wouldn't want to live that old. Oh, 70, it sounds like I'll be old and decrepit by then. 90, wow, nah, that's, hopefully I'm gone and I'll knock myself off at that point. 110, nah, no way, I'm not doing that. But once people hit these ages, they discover new reasons to live, and they keep living, and they keep doing it, and they're upset when the end comes. I mean, there's not, there might be a movie fantasy of some guy who's upset, he's accepting himself in this pantheonist idea, or this, I'm going to be with God now, and he looks, sort of okay with passing away. But most people, if you actually track it down the line, they hit a certain age and they go, well, actually there's something to live for. I might just keep going. And it's that idea. I don't know many people who actually get to a certain age and they say, well, when I was 10, I said I wouldn't go to this age, so I'm going to follow through on my wisdom when I was 10,
Right.
So, so a lot of, there is a idea in human spirit. There's this drive this will to live. People don't just knock themselves off because they hit some sort of arbitrary age, yeah?
That's so true, Steele. Thanks for bringing up those points. They're lovely points. So this is of course, I recognize this is a very complex topic. Further, it's a very personal one because different people have different views on aging and the biology and afterlife and so forth. I will say, however, that my research has uncovered, as well as discussions with people, and you just mentioned it yourself, when people get to a certain age, right? Provided they're living a relatively healthy life, I'm not going to say perfect life, but if people are healthy and their needs are being met, and they're living a life that they can mostly be satisfied with, they have a roof over their heads, they have enough to eat, they have good relationships with people, there, in my mind, there shouldn't be any reason for them to not want to go on any longer. Of course, provided they're not suffering from something like major depression, a scenario in which they don't really, they're so depressed that they're not able to function. What I'm talking about is, I would say, a normal state that people are in their everyday lives. It turns out, Steele, that life is a wonderful thing, and it turns out that I would say the vast majority of us find death to be horrific and it's not something that we purposefully seek out, unless, of course, one has made up their mind to commit suicide for whatever reason, and in that scenario, they're probably suffering from some sort of major depression, or not. But I would say for the vast majority of people, provided they're not living in a war zone or in complete misery 24 hours a day, I would tend to think that they would enjoy this thing called life and that they would want it to continue.
Yeah, and there's a multiplicity of reasons to enjoy life now, and we were talking with Dr. Turner, and those reasons are already multiplying with VR and SR, and these different realities that you will and can already on a primitive level start jumping into. It seems more and more likely that VR, this VR, we living in a VR simulated or a simulated universe hypothesis is something worth thinking about and considering. But even if you put that hypothesis aside, we are creating those ideas. So even if you are not of the best health, and you're confined to a old age care home in the future, I mean, I can't see why you couldn't be a young, strong man running around in a VR simulated world, and you could build up whatever type of life you really wanted, and why you would want to give that up. The idea that you could escape this reality and go into another reality and live out something that was fun and beneficial and stimulating and completely out of this world, to the fact where you find value in it, that you don't want to give it up, even if you don't like this reality, because of the lack of health treatments and because of the slowness in healthcare and other things. You wouldn't want to give that up. The multiplicity of life is changing now. There's other people who enjoy this reality just as much.
Right.
You mentioned that that if you have a healthy enough lifestyle, I mean, what's wrong with learning? Lots of people enjoy learning. If you've got nothing to do, depression is an absolutely a bad one. But the other one came to my mind straight away is loneliness. A lot of people are impacted with massive amounts of loneliness and social disconnection, and unfortunately, even with Facebook and social media, that has helped marginally. It's a dopamine effect, but even with this integration method of social community and a digital sphere, it's a semblance of communication. It's something, but if it was the fix, I mean, they wouldn't be building robots to replace for comfort, right? So we're not at that end stage yet where social media has somehow taken over the driver of the social mobility factor, and enabled us to fulfill that social need. It's human interaction on a real level is still very important, and whether that be real or VR related, because I think those two are almost the same sort of idea in a way. They're pretty much mirrors of reality because this reality is pretty interesting. So these anti-aging people, they say, these people who are against assisting in the longevity movement, what's some of the in your research, what's some of the quotes, what's some of the ideas that they put forward that super longevity and longevity and all this is a bad idea? Why do they say it's bad? What's some of the quotes you have there?
Yeah, that's a good question, Steele. So there are a variety of different objections that they have toward anti-aging research. Some of them moral objections. Other ones may be technological objections or economics, or they could be any sort of objection. I'd like to first start with moral objections to anti-aging research. As you'll note, one of the biggest opponents to this is the journalist and environmentalist Bill McKibben, who I believe in the early 2000s wrote a book called Enough. And in the book, he argued that, listen, where we're at right now, human lifespan is long enough. It's good enough. We don't need to. I don't want to misquote him, but in essence, that's what he's saying. He's saying we already live long enough. We should be happy with what we have right now, and that's, of course, he expands upon his argument. He doesn't go into the science of it, or right, but he basically argues that we shouldn't continue to try to tamper with the human condition, if you will. And I would like to respond to Mr. McKibben with this question. Sir, who are you to decide how long people should live? And it's as simple as that. Why does Bill McKibben get to decide if it's enough, right? Why does any single person get to decide whether someone else's lifespan is long enough? And how dare they make this decision for other people? And I realize that's not really what Mr. McKibben intended, but that's how it comes across. And I would just say to him, I respect your point of view that you believe the human lifespan's long enough and you wouldn't want to do anything to increase it or expand upon it. However, what you may not do is take away other people's right to be able to leverage enhancements in science and technology to increase their lifespan.
Wow, yeah, Mr. Bill McKibben, I hope someone email this to him. I'm not sure if he's still alive, though. I mean, if he's taking away other people's advantages of living, I mean, why would he still bother to be alive right now? I mean, it wouldn't make sense, right? Unless he's alive right now listening to this show in order to tell people to not live longer. I mean, what's your game, Mr. McKibben? I totally agree, but yeah, no, I'd like to look into that book. I'd like to read what his arguments are, and his arguments would probably be that, humans are a plague on the earth or something, and you have to have a certain cap at. I don't know what your argument is, but yeah, no, these people, they're quite disturbing in the fact that he's probably very happy also to probably go to, I don't know, Mr. McKibben personally, I've never met him, but I'm sure he's been to a public hospital and or has private health insurance or something. If he's sophisticated enough to write a book, I mean, and live, to tell other people not to live. I mean, why take advantages of modern society's technological progress as it is? And it's just kind of disturbing, and what's like, I don't know, I didn't get it. So what else you got, Mr. McKibben?
Yeah, so I suppose I should expand upon that. So in his book, Mr. McKibben, he talks about genetic engineering. He discusses somatic engineering, genetic engineering, whereby let's just give an example of a child who has genes that cause cystic fibrosis. Somatic engineering would be to go in and to perform genetic engineering such that this child is cured. He seems to be more open to somatic genetic engineering rather than germline genetic engineering, whereby we're able to go in at an embryo level and make modifications there. So, to be fair to Mr. McKibben, he does state his viewpoints on that, and I will even go so far as to say that he does bring about a number of very good points. But the one area where I disagree with him is when he says human lifespan is long enough. And again, no one person can decide whether it's long enough. for everyone else.
Is a bee's lifespan long enough? I mean, they only live
Right.
like 3 or 7 days or something. I mean, is he going to
Right.
judge the life cycle of a bee? Is he going to judge the life cycle of a whale? Is a whale's lifespan long enough? I mean, what makes him God and to dictate to other people of how long their lives should be? Does he agree with God that after the flood, or no, after the Nephilim or whatever in the Bible, the flood, I guess, he capped the lifespan to 120 years. Is he saying good on God for putting that cap on humanity because Methuselah, Adam and Noah, those guys were just living way too long. Noah happened to live to 600, 700 something years and happened to build an ark in between and save all of the animal species. But you know what? He should have only lived to 60. He shouldn't have lived to 600 and had all that experience. I mean, I don't believe in the Noah story anyway, or it happened or whatever, but it's irrelevant. But the point is that in the story, Noah was 600 before he even started building the ark. So, is Mr. McKibben saying that, God was wrong to start people out on the trajectory with expanded life? And then he said, God, because I thought God would be a pretty smart person, right? He would be a pretty smart being. And, why would he start humanity with like a long life and then realize later it's a bad idea? Like, wouldn't God think through the implications? So then all of a sudden God reversed it, and then Mr. McKibben saying, well, actually, I agree with God because God was stupid before he put a cap on it. I don't know. I don't know. But his challenging of people. It should be as simple as open-ended duration. That's what it should be. It should be people are free to live as long and well and as happy as they can for as long as they want to. And there are issues, okay? There are issues with, what if and we can go through some of these issues, and I'd like to go through some of these issues with you, but I'll let you go on. So that's Mr. McKibben. What else did he's genetic engineering, sure. Yeah, I mean, prevention is better than cure. I'm all for gene editing. I'm all for CRISPR gene editing and other gene editing tools, because if you have a longer life from the outset, you're going to have smarter people and they're going to make smarter decisions. And then when you increase the IQ of the population, you're not going to have as many kids. You're not going to have as wasteful a resource society. You're going to have smarter systems, better systems, and all of that. Actually, by shortening the life, you actually end up with dumber people who have kids because all of their natural sort of primitive responses kick in, and you end up with a dumber population that's a larger population when you have shorter lifespans. And that's how humans have exploded in population. Even when they're under massive trauma, like through the Black Plague and the Dark Ages, they continue to explode because they weren't as well educated. They lived a lot shorter lives, and the population kept increasing. The only reason that there was so many people after the 30s and the penicillin revolution is because mass education wasn't yet a real big thing. It is now, and you've seen the birth rates decline dramatically. And if people are living to 160, they might not choose to have kids until they're, or if they're living to 200 or 400, they might not choose to have kids until they're 200, and they might have one, and that will be a huge investment, a huge resource, and all those resources will be pumped up into the cognitive abilities and facilities. I don't know what this guy's saying. Sorry, continue, Mr. McKibben. Yeah.
Right. So you brought a good point. You brought up a good point there. We've seen that as societies have become wealthier, that they have tended to have fewer children. A really good example is not the obvious ones like Europe, but even India. I believe now, looking at the World Health Organization statistics, I believe India, the average Indian has something like 2.88 kids, so it's just under, so it's less than 3 kids. India.
Yeah.
But, if you were to tell this to someone, they wouldn't believe you. But that's definitely the case. We're seeing that as societies become wealthier, they choose for whatever reason to have fewer kids. I'm not going to argue that whether this is better or whether it's worse, but I'm just talking about what the actuality, what actually has been happening.
Mm-hmm.
Another objection to reversing aging comes from people who say, well, the argument takes on one of these different forms. In essence, what they're trying to say is that we don't have the resources to support a larger population on Earth. There are a lot of problems with this point of view. One example I like to bring up is several decades ago, there was a famous wager, the Simon Ehrlich wager between Julian Simon and Paul Ehrlich. Essentially, Paul Ehrlich was predicting that we'd have a massive explosion in population, and that it would be a Malthusian scenario in which there was widespread starvation, and of course, none of that ever happened. In fact, it didn't even come close to happening. We don't have a shortage of food. We have too much food. We're seeing an explosion in obesity throughout the world. So unfortunately, Mr. Ehrlich was completely wrong. What's interesting is he was actually kind enough to admit that he was wrong, but I believe he said something to the effect of, "I'm wrong now, but I'll be right in the future." Well, it's been now 40 years, and I'm not quite sure how you get to be wrong continuously for 40 years and still have an audience. But I think what's important is to look at why that happened. Well, we were able to leverage technological advancements to feed our population. And people who say, well, oh, the Earth can't handle that many people. Well, very clearly it can. There are a lot of different solutions for that. One of them is seasteading. Listen, we have most of the Earth that's being unused right now. There's a lot of evidence that we could build these structures on the ocean near the shore where we could house people. There's ways to feed people through responsible farming of seafood, seaweed, and so forth. So doing things that are outside the box, such as seasteading and leveraging improvements in science and technology, will enable us to house a bigger population on Earth.
Absolutely, and yeah, it's a blue planet. It's not a green planet. Like we had the lovely, wonderful David Shoemaker and Susan to come on and tell us about the Oceanic Conference that they went to.
Right.
That was fantastic, and like David Attenborough's documentary, it's the blue planet. It's not green. The only reason we think it's we put emphasis on the land is because we inhabit the land, but there's a lot of ocean out there. And there's a lot of ability to utilize that ocean as well in a sustainable way. Ecotechnics is this sort of idea of longevity under the ocean. And fish farming, sustainable produce under the ocean has been around a long time. Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Captain Nemo was essentially in a submarine, and he had fish farms all over the place, and he would do seasonal adjustments to where he would go. In some parts he would do crustacean fishing and harvest different sorts of seaweeds and other fish, and then he would go off to another part of the world where something else was in season. We wouldn't even have to do that. In those environments, we'd have artificial environments that would suited to external temperature and temperature derivatives for that local area. But on a mass scale, you can do massive industrial farming. In The Man in the White Castle, for example, in that book, they just drained the whole Mediterranean Sea and just turned it into a huge food bowl. I don't see why anything like that isn't possible. Also here in Australia, we have a lot of Sahara desert. I mean, not Sahara desert. A lot of desert in the middle of our country that we could turn into a giant food bowl that's just sitting there waiting. I mean, all it is wiping out a couple of a few different like ant species or something, but you replace that with a mega continent, a green continent, and that's being attempted, and we're actually having huge problems with that right now. That they didn't build that. The man who Mr. Bradfield, who designed the Sydney Harbour Bridge, designed a mega construction that looks beyond makes the Three Gorges Dam look like a kid's toy, in order to promote this. And the government has always said no, 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 no. And the reason the government has always said no, 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 no is because America doesn't want an agricultural power to challenge it. So it's always been, every time they put it on the drawing board, somebody flies down from Washington and says no, 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 no. So then the government says, oh, we don't have money for this. But on a human level, it's absolutely a great idea. You could turn this continent into a powerhouse of agriculture if you want more production. Africa is a great place for more food production. And, the reason we didn't have a Malthusian collapse is because a lot of these people don't integrate technological advances, Malthus was wrong because he didn't anticipate the agricultural revolution. Adolf Hitler was wrong because he didn't anticipate the fact that agriculture and fertilizer would take off. The whole Hitler regime was built on a Malthusian idea, and it was completely wrong. And the Soviets, who were on the opposite end of the spectrum, were wrong because they didn't adopt quick technological change that could have saved millions from starvation and stuff. So yeah, so it's an interesting idea. So seasteading, yep, I agree. I like it. There's plenty of room under the ocean for expansion, and plenty of innovation there. And it's a whole new labor force. It's a whole new way to live and think, and it will change humans forever.
Right. Yes. Well, you know what, Steele, I'm glad you do see it my way. Look, the mistake that people have made in the past is they've underestimated the potential for science and technology to help alleviate a lot of problems and challenges that we humans have faced. Which is not to say that science and technology are a panacea for all ills. However, with that being said, I do think we owe it to ourselves to think outside the box and look at other potential solutions that may not be readily apparent. Indeed, with the challenges that we're facing in terms of climate change, I'm afraid we will need to look at solutions that are outside of the box in order to be able to resolve and rectify such challenges.
Yeah. So what else have we got? So because we're for curing aging, getting these telomeres and telomerase, getting the chromosomes. That's one way of doing it. There's genetic engineering. There's nanotechnology, which is transhumanists are really interested in. To promote longevity. What else are these people saying who are saying that curing aging or expanding the human lifespan is a bad idea? What else are they saying?
Well, Steele, I wish I could say that it was only the people who were opposed to science and technology who were arguing that we shouldn't do anything about aging. Sadly, though, there are scientists themselves who are raising objections. I would like to quote Dr. Leonard Hayflick. As you know, Dr. Hayflick came up with the Hayflick limit several decades ago, which at the time was quite revolutionary. Prior to that, it was assumed that cells were immortal. And Dr. Hayflick, with his theory, proved that cancer cells are immortal, but regular cells are not, and this had huge implications in the field of gerontology. Now, whether or not one agrees with Dr. Hayflick's findings, we must admit that he's been quite an influential figure in the movement. Henceforth, it was quite disturbing to me recently to read a paper from about 20 years ago. I think this was 1998 at a lecture at the Fourth International Symposium on the Neurobiology and Neuroendocrinology of Aging, whereby Dr. Hayflick said, quote, "Indeed, I cannot imagine any scenario where tampering with the aging process would be beneficial," end quote. That was a shocking statement. But then several years later, in a paper he wrote with Dr. Stuart J. Olshansky, another biogerontologist, they said, quote, "Successful efforts to slow the rate of aging would certainly have dramatic health benefits for the population, by far exceeding the anticipated changes in health and length of life that would result from the complete elimination of heart disease, cancer, stroke, and other age-associated diseases and disorders." So it looks like 2 years later, he's kind of saying the opposite. Well, no, it does actually make sense to sort of tamper with the aging process. So I was kind of confused there. But one thing we should recognize is objections to anti-aging do not only come from people who are opposed to science and technology, but sometimes they may even come from scientists themselves, which is very disturbing indeed. Now, I don't know Dr. Hayflick. I do have a tremendous amount of respect for him. I've read his book, How and Why We Age, as well as a lot of his journal and a lot of his articles written in journals. Dr. Hayflick now, I would like to answer him thusly. Dr. Hayflick is 91 years old. If he's fortunate enough to continue living longer, more than likely he will probably get dementia, as you know, which is a horrifying condition that I would never wish upon my worst enemy. And so, looking at Dr. Hayflick's statement, I wanted to, if I were speaking to him, I would say something like, "Mate, are you for real? You're 91 years old, and more than likely, you have a great chance of getting dementia, which is a horrific condition. Are you sure it wouldn't be worth it to tamper, quote unquote, with the aging process?" I think it would. Imagine the amount of suffering we could relieve, right? Even if we didn't extend the maximum human, even if we didn't extend the human lifespan to 150 years or 200 years or whatever, what if, given that aging is the single biggest risk factor for cancer, heart disease, and dementia, even if we didn't extend the lifespan a long time, we could help alleviate a lot of unnecessary suffering for millions and millions and millions of people. So, of course, it's worth it.
A lot of these arguments are born out of the notion, this petty philosophical notion that scarcity is a good thing. Now, scarcity gives life value, because if you know that your life is ticking down and that you're going to die at some point, then you somehow, in a sort of Zen way, no offense to not using Zen in a negative way, but in a Zen way, you appreciate your life more, therefore you give it value. It's this notion of appreciated value over potential, value. Again, like if Noah had have passed away at 60, he wouldn't have saved the whole planet, and all the species. His potential value at 60 was actually saving all of the animals and species on Earth. But but if he passed away, his actual value, which was saving all those animals, would have been depleted. Now, in this case, Dr. Hayflick's case, he's 91 years of age. To me, it sounds like a victim of Stockholm syndrome, where he's saying, I have this sort of this macro social political worldview, and I'm willing to be a martyr to my cause of this macro worldview of what I think is correct. Tampering with the aging process, I asked Dr. Bill Andrews, and I said, what about this democratization of the technologies? Because as soon as you start talking about anything about anti-aging, you start getting the comment section. Everybody goes, well, what about the rich hoarding it? I mean, there's a superficial sort of anti-aging now, and it's called face creams, and it's called externality. You can go to the spa thing, and you can get Botox, and you can get this superficial anti-aging stuff that doesn't actually achieve anything internal, because it's all about the internal working. It's all about keeping those cells healthy and keeping your brain healthy and keeping the mechanisms, your body, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, and your internal organs and your muscles. It's about keeping the whole machine healthy, but you can do this superficial stuff. And those anti-aging creams are not that expensive. I mean, they're not that expensive. And getting your genome mapped is not that expensive anymore. And
no, not anymore.
No, and it's all coming down in price, and that's what happens with technology. There's a demand side, a supply side, and the supply side always reduces in cost when it's on a technological basis. And Dr. Bill Andrews said, if I discovered a way to shorten telomeres and telomerase tomorrow, I'll be dropping it out of aircraft for everyone. So it's kind of like they have this macroeconomic, macro-political worldview, and they say, I know the best because I think that if we tamper with the aging process as a whole, humans will go on consuming. They will, destroy the environment forever, because we're not going to wake up and we're not going to find technological solutions, and we're not going to find ethical solutions, and we're never going to invent veggie burgers to replace meat products, and we're never going to we're never going to go to space to relieve that carrying capacity. They have this sort of view, and they're willing to sort of martyr themselves in a sort of Stockholm syndrome way, and you're willing to get dementia for it. It doesn't make sense to me. It sounds like they want to be a martyr to a cause.
Right. Well, I can't speak for Dr. Hayflick. Obviously, he's far more knowledgeable than all of us about the aging process, and so again, I'd like to iterate that I have a great deal of respect for him and his work, and I wouldn't want to be disrespectful whatsoever to him, but I take issue with some of his statements about why it's not tampering with the. He likes using that word of tampering with the aging process isn't beneficial. It'd be hugely beneficial on so many levels. He does have some objections about this, which unfortunately we probably won't have enough time to get into today. But I would like to answer this objection that some people have, which you just mentioned. I don't know what I'd call it, but somehow this idea that if we were to have huge breakthroughs in reversing aging, that somehow the rich would hoard this technology. Well, sorry, they didn't hoard LASIK or the double bypass heart surgery or any of those other technologies or genome mapping. And so I believe if someone's going to make that sort of objection, that they need to provide evidence as to why they think that might be the case. As it stands right now, all the huge breakthroughs that we've seen in science and engineering and medicine have not been hoarded up by an imaginary group of people sitting in a room. The Illuminati did not hoard these technologies all for themselves, and are not conspiring to enslave all of humanity by withholding a cure for aging. So that's not a very valid objection at the moment.
They wouldn't have let life expectancy rise to where it is. I mean, it's not like the Queen Mother or Donald Trump or pick your president, pick your wealthy person, pick your banker, pick anybody, it's not like they have a great time aging either. It's not like they're really excited about it.
No.
Actually, I specifically remember Donald Trump complaining a lot how he's upset that he doesn't look as good as he used to. He complains about that quite a bit in his speech. He says, I used to look so good, and now I don't look so good. I look like a bit of a wreck. He still looks the best, obviously. He's Donald Trump, but you know what I mean? But he complains about it. He complains about the aging process in his speech. And so it's like maybe he has a little bit of advantage being a billionaire, but on the basic biological level, he's the same as you and me, unless he's an android, which I don't think he is. So maybe it's a Turing test. I don't know. Who knows? But my point is that I don't think he is. Let's just assume that he's a human being for a second. And yeah, and so he complains about the aging process. The Queen, these Illuminati people, they complain about the aging process, and you can see that explicitly as they literally get older and age and get sick and die from aging. So no, I don't understand this at all. And the other thing is, there's different government systems all around the world, and there's a place called the United Nations, and they're all competing. So if America makes a breakthrough, and Cuban intelligence or Russian intelligence or European intelligence works out that they have some sort of technology that they're using to enhance their elite class or their banker class or whatever, they can hold that as a blackmail over the other state, or they can try and, like China's very good at extracting technology. We know that from corporations and other state-owned entities. I mean, they could just steal the technology, and then because they're bound by their own laws, they might just artificially democratize it through there. I mean, Cuba would. I mean, I'm like, it's a socialist country, or Venezuela, or out of spite, they might just democratize it and put it out into WikiLeaks or whatever. It's very hard to hold on to this sort of stuff. It'd have to be a very secret cabal in a very secret location under the Iron Mountain. It's very hard to do this sort of stuff nowadays, and especially with quantum computing coming around. So even if they somehow manage to hoard this and do all of that work, quantum computing is coming around, and Google will know soon enough anyway. And then you've got people like Ray Kurzweil in there, who's I tell you what, like if he could, he's a good guy who would assist in maneuvering this stuff out into the world sphere, because it's good, and corporations benefit. This corporate versus government as well, and corporations and government like larger populations because they have larger labor pool supplies and larger consumer bases on the other end, and they make more money. Every depopulation myth from Malthusian ideas to superbug ideas to FEMA camp or whatever, they've all been disproven over and over and over again, because geopolitics and global politics and world politics come into play, and there is no super government that wants a depopulated 500,000 people at this point in time. It doesn't make sense.
No, and that's a good point. I think if someone is coming up with objections to aging or something else, I think they need to avoid these tremendous wild leaps in logic, saying, well, if A happens, then B will happen, and there's very little to no evidence that any of those wild scenarios will take place. But nonetheless, I think as proponents of anti-aging research, we need to be ready to answer the objections calmly and with facts. Let's just display the evidence. Let's display the benefits it would have for humanity, and then galvanize everyone together to start working on it. And look, if advancements in anti-aging come from the United States or Australia or China or Japan, I don't really care as long as it happens, because as you said, once it does happen, it will proliferate, it will spread. Technology has a way of doing that. And furthermore, it'd be hugely beneficial to humanity on so many levels.
Yeah, yeah. Earth is more prosperous, technologically savvy, a better place than it's ever been. And there's 7 billion people. The historic, the barbarous Dark Ages, and Romans fighting it. That was all based on lower population levels. I mean, we've come around as a global humanity, and actually thought this stuff out. And the world is more peaceful than it's ever been. On the
Right.
whole, I mean, on the whole, and to say something like condemn people to the aging process, and say, we're not allowed to fix aging. I mean, what you're essentially saying is humans are trash. Humans are garbage. They're rotten meat machines that need to follow prescribed natural processes. Transhumanism is not is saying that people think, feel, love, have different needs, are creative beings. They are solution-based creatures. They're intelligent. They're not just meat machines for your macroeconomic, macro-political fantasy. These are
Right.
living human beings that should have options to either live to live as long as they want, based on the tech. Based on technology, based on the technological innovations and or limitations. It's that people aren't just your macroeconomic, macro-political toy to condemn to death. Of which, if you're certain, if any of these people are religious who have these anti-aging ideas and say, well, it's okay because if you just accept God X, you're going to go to the better place. I mean, it's like what we've learnt with post Earthrise trauma or enlightenment, is that there's so many different theories out there and so many different religions and so many different ideas that what one is correct is so much harder to analyze. And we don't have enough information to say that, wow, actually you're really smart. I'm just going to follow you down the path, get sick and die, and then just hope on faith and belief that you've been correct, because that's what people do on the whole. They hold on to something. When I just can't see that there's just not enough data. There's just not enough information as of yet. There's so many possibilities. Old established religions and new ones coming around the corner with advances in science and technology, and and when we hit the larger curve and we get super AI and or artificial general intelligence, and the questions that those will pose, and the answers that they'll unlock, life's going to be so much weirder. So a lot of these religions are going to seem kind of a little bit strange, to be honest. Some guy, he comes down, it's Jesus Christ, for example, and I'm not saying this in an insulting way, but he came down and he cured the blind. I mean, humans themselves are almost curing the blind. I mean, does that mean, how special does that actually become? I mean, if we're living in a Christian dark age, and you said some dude like Jesus Christ cured the blind, oh, that's pretty cool, because I don't understand anything about optics, the optic nerve system, corneas. They're 3D printing corneas now. I mean, so it's like, that was pretty cool, like, because he's God. But now it doesn't seem as good. It sounds like a time traveler. It sounds like some guy who went back in time and was like, hey, I could just do this, and use his scanning device, and he cured blindness. I mean, if humans can do that, they're matching God already, and we're inventing AGI and super AGI that can do that. So on some levels, God's being tested. He's being put under the test by human intelligence, and that's what transhumanism is trying to say, that there's so many unanswered questions, and humans are really, really super intelligent, that there's not much point. I want to hang around and see what happens.
Right. Well, I mean, I most certainly would love to hang around for a very long time and see what happens, because I find all of this stuff very fascinating. And you had a number of good points there. Firstly, yes, some advancements that we take for granted right now, such as organ transplants, would have been considered magic not too long ago. So I think we've got to look at these things, these advancements, and be honest with ourselves and say that A, we do appreciate them very much. People who are suffering and who need an organ transplant or bone marrow transplant and who get it and who then are able to live a long and healthy life. I'm sure they're very appreciative of it, as are their family members and friends and society and so forth. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, Steele, that unfortunately hope and faith are not going to go far enough in terms of improving the human condition. So as a hope is not going to cure cancer. Working on a cure for cancer is going to cure cancer, and so forth. And so, as helpful as some people might say it is for them to have hope or faith, or I would never want to take that away from them, and I think they're entitled to have that. However, I think with the magnitude of challenges in front of us, it's going to take a lot more than that to come to a resolution. And again, I'm not saying science and technology are a panacea for all ills, but in terms of aging and disease, they are currently our best hope. And so we owe it to ourselves, not just to ourselves, but our family members and our friends and society as a whole, to work on this, to work on such things for the benefit of everyone. This is the promise of transhumanism, elevating the human condition by alleviating suffering. And things such as aging, disease, contribute greatly to suffering. And as a transhumanist, I feel obligated to work on these however I can, whether it's writing about these things or advocating for a cure for aging, depression, cancer, dementia, what have you. This is the promise of transhumanism, that we can leverage science and technology for the betterment of humanity.
You know, I'd like to take some of these anti-aging people and time travel them into or put them in bodies or in a scenario that we're talking about, where, you know, they're free from scarcity, free from, you know, death denial, and you know, free from aging and sickness and death, and have good bodies and living in that world, and then trying to argue that it's bad, instead of just looking around them and saying, wow, if we made, because it's kind of, for them, it's kind of like, I feel like for them, and again, no disrespect to any of them, but yeah, I feel like for them, because I was talking to someone at a restaurant about this the other day, and she was like, what do you mean if we make everyone immortal suddenly? And it's kind of not that way. It's not that suddenly everybody in the room is now immortal because of some sort of magical pill or something. It's not forced on them. It's a process of transitioning to a whole new society and a whole new way of thinking and a whole new conception about what life can be. And I think people will change their minds when they get to that society, because they look around them and they see this mismatch. When you look at a poor country, you think, oh, why would those people want to live longer? Why would we force that on them? And it's not like that. It's not like that at all. And plus, those poor people are marginally more wealthy now than they used to be anyway. The poverty is being alleviated around the world because of capitalist ideas a lot of the time, and good governance structures and human rights and world aid and stuff like this. But no, it's just like, I don't think they actually put themselves in the shoe of living under the circumstances and the scenarios that we're talking about. They just sort of think as if like it was suddenly forced upon everybody simultaneously, where they've drained of options, and now everybody has to live forever, eating and drinking and consuming in a sort of Dumb and Dumber scenario. And I feel like that's what they're talking about, and it doesn't make sense, because that's not what we're saying, and we've never said that. And when, because I find those arguments over and over and over again, And I also find that they don't understand the progression of civil society and how it's evolved to this point. And it's not perfect, but it's a lot better. It's a lot
Right.
better now that we have human rights and we have, a vast array of privacy protections and human rights but it's supposed to be getting better, and we're talking about wellness and super happiness involved in the mix as well. So it's kind of like, I think these people are missing the point of I think they're missing a lot of the points of how we could how the enhancements and the society and the metaphysics, how it all sort of goes together in a evolutionary channel, instead of just this stop-start way of thinking, which is what I think that they usually do when I talk to these people.
Yeah, Steele, I think you're so right about that. It's not going to be a scenario in which someone will take a pill and then they'll magically be immortal. Firstly, I think people who are raising that objection are seeing it the wrong way. It's not about immortality, because even if we could cure aging today, people could still die from suicide or in war or in a car accident. So it's not about immortality. It's about improving the human condition by allowing people to live younger, healthier lives. What I like to ask people who seem to object to anti-aging research is, I always ask this question to them: wouldn't you like to live 5 to 10 more years of a young, healthy life? And still, all of them say yes. And so any progress we do make on anti-aging will be it's going to be going in steps. It's not we're not going to get to a situation in some time in the distant future whereby we'll just snap our fingers and voila, everyone's magically cured. It just doesn't work like that. And I think people who are raising these objections, I think they do owe it to themselves to read the literature more, look at the research that's been done, look at the technological breakthroughs that we've had so far, and it is true that advancements in anti-aging have not come about as fast as we would have liked, but that doesn't make it any less noble to work on, right? Just because every single human since the beginning of time has aged and then eventually died, it doesn't make this less noble. In fact, it would make it the most noble thing to work on, because this is humankind's last frontier, not outer space. It's right. It's aging, right, and it's the single biggest challenge we've ever had. And so I think any progress we could make on this would be huge.
Yeah, it's a consuming project, because you're talking about the whole body, the brain, consciousness, and everything, and it's and society, and the leaders of your governments. I mean, there wouldn't be as many wars. I mean, because if everyone is healthier and happier, I mean, there's not as many wars and there's not as much turmoil and there's not as much incentive to do bad things, because everybody is more happy and they don't have to just grasp for resources as the clock ticks down, which is what they seem to do, which is why we build empires and all that other stuff. Hey, Arvin, I gotta go, but thank you so much. This has been a great one, Cure Aging, and if we ever do this again, we'll have to bring Dr. Bill Andrews on, and he can give us the real science side, or some other people, the author, the person who named biolateralism. I like that a lot. So yeah, we could do that as well. So thank you so much. This has been an incredible one, and I agree. Yeah, let's cure aging. Let's put it behind us. It's a horrible, debilitating illness.
That's correct, Steele, and thank you once again for having me on your show. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to doing more episodes with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Always looking forward to doing more episodes, and we got so much more to talk about, lots more to talk about, and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.